she's got one foot and daddy ain't got none. Two folks got but 5 toes, they can't walk near mine run. Rock and rollin', hopping round the place, get to drinking and they wheelchair race. 5 toes clean up, no more, no less. 5 little bees, they're missing all the rest.
Hello and welcome to Amputee Wisdom. Thank you for joining us. We're shooting our first episode with a friend of mine, Steve Fine, who's going to be sharing his story on limb loss and living with an amputation. So the first question I would like to ask Steve is, can you please introduce yourself to our audience?
My name is Steve Fine. I'm a CPA with the American Board of Certification of Prosthetics as an assistant, a prosthetist assistant. And I've been working as a technician for 29 years now. I lost my leg in 1983 as a result of an automobile accident. I was a passenger on a motorcycle and we were hit by a car. And that was 2 weeks after graduation of high school. So I was in the hospital laid up for 2 weeks. They estimated me to be in there for 3 to 4 months. I was only in there 2 weeks simply because of my youth and my health was really good at the time. And I just healed very quickly and I was out of the hospital and into a hospital, a very good hospital called Bryn Mawr Rehab is where I rehabbed at. And so I was out at Bryn Mawr Rehab for probably about 2 weeks learning how to use my brand new exoskeletal prosthetic. So that was the initial start, and there's been a lot of turns in the road since then. There was a fella in Philadelphia that was fitting me, an older gentleman. And it seemed to work pretty well and got me acclimated to wearing a leg. But I always seemed to think in a way it could have been better. There was a bit holding me back. Seemed like it was slowing me down on some of the things I wanted to do. So I got interested in making prosthetics and I wanted to know more about it. So a really cool outfit through the state of Pennsylvania called the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation sent me to a shop, paid half of my wage while I was being trained, and I went on full time after I was trained. And I've been doing it ever since. So that's what I needed to learn in order to get myself something a little bit better. I just needed something better, and I needed to be educated. So that's the path I took. And for the first 13 years, I did nothing but build orthotics and gradually worked my way into prosthetics. So,
I wanted to hit up. I want to come back to a few of the nuggets you dropped along the way. First, going back to the story of how you lost your limb. You lost your limb when you were pretty young. You were in high school.
Just out of high school. Just graduated.
18?
18, yes.
18. And you said you lost your limb due to a motorcycle accident. Was it that you got hit by something? Or?
Yes, a car crossed over the medial strip and ran into our bike. Actually ran into me on the left side on the back end of the bike. The driver broke his collarbone and was ejected and luckily not very hurt at all. The car literally hit my leg, so that's where the leg amputation. It was pretty much, I knew on the road that I was still conscious the whole time, but I knew that, my leg was really gone. I could, I actually saw my foot was up here somewhere by my head and I knew it was really mangled and it was, and then I guess I assumed I went into shock at that point, but I never went out until they knocked me out.
Wow.
Yeah, so they gave me some heavy morphine and knocked me out when I got to the ER. First, they took us through a hospital called Riddle Hospital over in Lima, Pennsylvania, and they didn't have the facility, so they ran us right through, dropped my fellow that was driving, they dropped him off there and took me down to Crozier in Chester, where they had a better ER, and a doctor at the time by the name of Dr. DeSantis did my amputation. My mother worked at that hospital in that ER, and luckily she wasn't working that night that I came in, but Mom hooked me up with all the good docs.
Wow. What happened to your other friend who got in the accident?
Like I said, he broke his collarbone, but he wasn't down. He didn't have any internal injuries or no head trauma, so he was good and out of the hospital within a week or so. Mm-hmm. So.
And how long did you have to stay in the hospital? So you were transferred from one hospital to another. How long did you have to stay there from injury to when you were admitted in the hospital to when you left?
About 2 weeks, about 2.5 weeks, which was pretty phenomenal. It was really healed up quick and was motivated to get back to doing some things. My biggest thing at the time was I didn't want to put my parents or my family through, I felt as though I put them through something really bad here, and I didn't want to, so I just wanted to move on with it, and the faster the better is how I was looking at it then. To, whether I could absorb it or not, I acted like I could until I got through, and then I would, take one day at a time, one step at a time, but yeah, it was a process for sure.
And how many years ago was this?
It was 1983 that all happened. Wow. So yeah. And
as a young man, I can't even imagine, especially going now into your adulthood. I guess when you're 18, you're still an adolescent, probably adolescent adult. You're in that level.
Yeah.
How?
Pretty invincible, of course, then, yeah, and all,
exactly, right? Like how did having an amputation or losing your limb, how did that really affect the goals and dreams that you had as a young man back then?
It put a bit of a hamper on me. I was always a hands-on worker and kind of, I guess you could call me like cut out to be kind of a laborer. And I always knew that my physical body I would be able to, create a living for myself somehow. I was so soon out of high school. I really didn't have a set direction to go. I was still feeling my way of what I wanted to do, kind of thing. So, but I always knew that I could do something with my body. So then when I got hurt, that really put a cramp on. That really put an effect that it was kind of heavy, like whether I was going to be able to do this or that. So I just started thinking, some way I got to be able to make a living with this prosthetic. This has to somehow, generate a living for me, because I went out and I did a lot of different jobs. I kind of jumped back into, what I was doing, and I happened to be working with some friends of mine. They were carpenters, and I was doing trim work for them. And, I'm walking over planks, over big holes with my prosthesis, carrying doors and stuff, going, I don't think I'm going to be able to do this for a long period of time. I'm going to end up getting hurt again, So I had to find something where I could labor, but I could deal with the labor, you know what I mean? Because it being, different and stuff. So, like I said, I went through the OVR, and that really, I've been doing it ever since that. So, they sent me to school also for mechanical drawing, but I just really took to the leg thing just because it was it was part of my life now, and it was, so I just needed something better, in order to feel whole again, So.
And how long did it take you to go from being a laborer to saying like, hey, I can't keep doing this anymore?
I did that for probably about 5 years, 6 years, on and off, different jobs. I was going around filling out applications and trying to, I even tried to get in the operator engineers union at one point to operate heavy equipment. I was running a dozer with a friend of mine, had a machine that he was training me on with the old wooden leg, and I had to push the clutch with the prosthetic, and I really wanted to do that. I just didn't make the cut there. So, and then the other jobs kind of just, here and there, and I could see what I could do and what I wouldn't be able to do long term. Like, for instance, one time I was working at my father's metal shop, and he had me grinding welds, cleaning up welds, kind of the beginner's thing that a guy would do there. And I was wearing coveralls with my wooden leg, and the sparks are hitting it, and I'm not feeling it. And next thing you know, I'm on fire. Like, there's flames up, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm never gonna last doing this, right? I mean, walking over welding wire, it was really a dangerous place to work with a prosthetic, should I say. Steel, welding wire everywhere, a lot of ladder climbing and stuff. So, you know, I kept jumping around trying to figure out a way, you know, and then when I came through that course through OVR, that solidified it. And you know, I like to communicate with people and stuff about the issues and things, but I was also getting new stuff myself. So I was evolving from an exoskeletal prosthesis to an endoskeletal, which is a completely different animal.
Can you talk about those two? What's the difference?
Yeah, the exoskeletal is a hard socket, kind of the old school stuff. I call it like a non-adjustable leg. So it's a fixed wooden leg, and your alignment's fixed. So it's not a modular components and pieces and parts where you can adjust it. As you progress, if you had like a contracture or something, you could dial that out gradually, where a wooden leg is, you know, that's your alignment that day, and that's it. And your body's always changing. The biggest thing was the socket itself being a hard socket. It atrophied your residual limb, which every year you just got a little weaker and a little weaker, and you kind of wondered why. You know, I'm working at this, and I'm not getting stronger. You know what I mean? Well, turns out that my socket I was wearing wasn't promoting any muscle development. So I got into what they call ischial containment flexible inner socket, which, you know, locked my trochanter and my ischium tuberosity, where I could have more control over the leg and also fire off the muscles and keep the muscles alive and the blood pumping and decrease some phantom pain, like everything just more natural. So that's the big difference between one, you're promoting it, and the other one, you're atrophying. So they're pretty much just about phased out. The exoskeletal is pretty much phased out, but it did take clean into the mid-90s for that to happen.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Why?
Occasionally we'll make a wooden leg, occasionally from an older amputee or something that's just, you know, set in their ways, and that's what they, you know, sometimes it's like that.
I can't imagine that being comfortable at all.
No. You should have different sockets every 3 to 4 years. Your body's changing. I run into people that wear sockets, some 12, 15 years. One person had the same socket 30 years. So it's tough to change them. They're really set in their ways. So.
Well, whatever makes you comfortable.
Yes.
So I wanted to go back to talk about the school that you mentioned. So we're going down the timeline. You lost your limb right after high school, 18 or so. Mm-hmm. 5 years later, while trying to do different laborer's job, you decide like, hey, this is just not something I can keep doing long term. I should really try and look into going into this prosthetic field. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about the school again? I know you mentioned it earlier. How did you hear about it? How did you get involved? You know, what did you think when you started working at the school?
Well, it was the thing was, it was.
What was the name of the school?
It was Office of Vocational Rehabilitation. It's OVR is what they call it, and it was in Rosemont, Pennsylvania. And what they did is they placed me into a company, paying half of my wage while I'm being trained. So I remember, because I was making a whopping $6 an hour.
$6.
And they were paying 3 of those dollars, and the owner paid the other 3. And within a month, I was on full time and basically detached from OVR, and now a full-time employee with the company, which at that time it was on Passyunk Avenue. It was called Coco Brothers Prosthetics and Orthotics.
But you focused a lot of your time on making orthotics.
Orthotics is where the opening was. I could get in the door that way. So yeah, I did a full 13 years of my career before I was able to touch any prosthetics.
Wow.
The older guys were kind of protective of their position and job, and they just didn't, you know, that and a combination of they really didn't need anybody for that particular job then, you know, they needed these guys. So I learned a lot about pulling plastic, working with plaster, modifying molds, taking casts, things like that. So it all was a great foundation for prosthetics. So I didn't lose any time. I just didn't make a lot of money back then. But it took a while to climb the ladder, but it was certainly worth it.
Did you at least get to work on your own prosthetic?
No, it's actually only been, believe it or not, I've only made 2 of my own prosthetics. The last 2 I've had, actually. Before that, I was always getting fit by someone else. And I looked at it as kind of like trying to cut your own hair. It's very difficult to set your own alignment. You need help. You need another person. And my socket at that point. So, as we talked about this wooden leg, I got into a flexible inner socket. Like, that's a whole nother story on how that all took place. But when that happened, the muscle developed and everything started going on. So I was needing socket replacements and follow up until we got, obtained a new shape and got stable. So that went on for about 3 years in itself to get myself situated, from exo to endoskeletal and the muscle development and the shape change, and it went on. That was the real learning experience that I actually went through the entire system from casting on through. It was completely eye-opening to me.
So I thought it was very interesting because you have an amputation at that time, and you were young, and it's very interesting that the company that you were working with wouldn't even let you touch.
They didn't. They didn't. And let me tell you, when I started getting it was time for Steve to get I came to the company with a leg on, but of course now I'm there for a while and I need a new leg. Okay, the new company is going to make my leg for me. Well, it wasn't that easy. It took about 8 months, and the owner wasn't. He wasn't all hip with that, so he wanted me to clock out every time I saw the prosthetist, and we worked together, and this process went on for eight months. It drug out, and it was something, but he didn't like me working on my stuff. So no, that was always you could actually say up until this company I'm with now, it's always been like a thing, like a political thing with me. Because about at that point in time there, where I'm telling you, is when everything changed for me, when I supposedly got saved. And I did get saved. Yeah, I got saved, yes. And I can tell you about that story if you're interested in that.
I'd love to hear it.
Okay, well, that took place. So I was working at this shop in Passyunk up in Philly, and a thing came across where they're having a running clinic in Atlantic City this weekend. So me and a couple of the guys from the shop really wanted to go. They had 2 Paralympic athletes, one above the knee and one below the knee, that were showing amputees how to run foot over foot. And at that time, this was probably 1993, no above knees were really running foot over foot. It was really a new thing, and it was
foot over foot.
Foot over foot is where old school above knees would do a hop skip. So they would basically kick the prosthetic up and bring their sound side up to the prosthetic and not through it. So foot over foot is running just like able body, foot over foot. And so it was a big thing, and a lot of the actual carbon foot technology was happening right then and there, just beginning. So that's what really opened that up, that and those sockets I'm talking about. So anyway, they were having this clinic, and we went down, and I got my new leg. It took 8 months to build, that I thought was awesome. And nobody never told me it wasn't awesome. But they did tell me to stay after the show. They wanted to adjust my prosthesis. I said, sure, what the heck? What do I got to lose, right? So I stay after the show. Next thing you know, I've got 5 prosthetists around me. Now, back at work, I had one guy, and I had to clock out and do all this and barely get his time. Now I got 5 people working on me. And it was pretty exciting. And they told me in a really nice way that my leg is kind of messed up. Like, I had a 10-degree flexion contracture, which I never knew what that was. And So basically my prosthetic was built in 10 degrees of flexion, so I had lost that much range of motion in my gait. So here I am, like 20 years old, with, wearing this with this contracture because I never knew how to stretch or anything, right? So the guys, they worked on me and dialed me in best they could, and in the meanwhile, they said, "Hey, would you be?" And these are two amputee Paralympians here, and would you be interested in throwing the shot put for the U.S. team? I said, "Oh, I think I would." I mean, at the time, I was working on my house, but I didn't really have anything really going on. I mean, I had a lot of work at the house going on, but so I did. I went home and I started. I never threw shot put other than in high school a little bit, but I was basically a football player and a wrestler. But I started to throw the shot, and my leg kept falling off because I'm held on by suction. And I called the guy I met there at the Atlantic City running clinic, and he said, "Well, you got to do this, Steve, and do that to your socket." And I said, "Wait, I can't do any of this at work. They don't want me to do this at work." He said, "Well, you're going to have to come see me. I'll make you a socket." It's terrific. I said, I put in for 2 weeks vacation, and I went up to New York to see my buddy, and boy, we became buddies. And long and short of it, he basically gave me one heck of an education, one heck of a leg, a lot of legs. He put a lot of legs on a lot of athletes that year. There was probably 6 of us that he was working with. Some were track runners and stuff. But he did $400,000 worth of donation prosthetics that year for several of us, and I was one of the guys. Plus, at the time, it wasn't OSHA that made the foot. It was a company called Flex Foot, and they sponsored me and were giving me feet and stuff. So, man, I hit the big time now. And I didn't have any money to go anywhere or do nothing. So, and my father, being the awesome man that he is, gave me some money to go compete and make these trips. And he actually went another step further and got me a coach. There was a top track and field coach, and I had my own coach then. And so my dad didn't have to coach me, which was good, so we could keep our relationship. Because he was a football coach, and I would come over there. He had a nice shot put circle for me in the yard. It was right next to his built-in pool, so after training, I could just dive in, and it was wonderful. But I came over one day, and he had 2 big uprights with a clothesline across because he wanted that shot higher. So I had to, it was almost like a field goal. I was
putting your football skills to use.
Yeah, not to mention some of the verbal things he would say as I'm throwing. So I had to find a coach. He was a football coach, and we were butting heads, and so he got me a coach. And this guy never ever worked with an amputee before, so he was all into it. We had mattresses all around the throwing ring, for when I was doing the spin technique, and I was doing some glide technique. I also got into throwing a little discus too. But it was really a neat experience there, and it was good to have a coach like that could teach me how unnatural these moves were to train your brain. And that's another thing he taught me, is how to train your brain to do certain things. So the sport became more than just a sport. It was like a whole social thing. It was this huge connection with other amputees, seeing them running for real in front of you. It just changed everything and just opened up everything. And I can recommend anything for a new amputee, is to go see someone who's doing some things with their prosthesis, to set some goals for yourself to work towards. Not everyone has to be a Paralympic athlete. I like to think more about the whole social end of the sport than the actual sport itself, like the whole way it brings everyone together and stuff. And my prosthetist went on to be head prosthetist for the Paralympics that year in 1996, and I got to go along, and I also got to do some technical work there out of the trailer. Autobach had a trailer on the field that we did repair trailer. So I got to work on legs from all around the country and the world, and it was just again, I think it might have been better than the actual competition. To me, it was just amazing to see people working for years, 3-4 years, and then maybe they might have broke something the day before the meet, and like we had to fix it, and we did, and we fixed it for them, and it's just, you know how much they got invested, you know, in time. So, but it taught me a lot of stuff like that, and I played with it a bit. I more or less just throw my medicine ball around nowadays, not so much the shots or nothing like that, but it taught me a lot of good discipline and things like that, and how sport is more than just a sport. It's a big social connection with everyone. That's pretty important, because you meet people, and you meet people that are contacts for life, and just doing different things that inspire you to do better. So I'm not a big sport guy today, but I stay active, and I do a lot of things, and a lot of everyday things that aren't really recognized, but I'm not worried. I'm not looking for recognition for it, but there's a lot of us amputees out there that do a lot of things around the house, in our daily lives, that make us Paralympic athletes in our own being. You know what I mean? It's for real. There's a lot of different things that you do that a lot of people don't really notice because it's not a sport, but it's a huge accomplishment when you can sit back and say, hey, you know, like me and my girlfriend dug a koi pond by ourselves and built it ourselves, and it's, you know, 3,000 gallons and all these rocks and dirt and all that stuff, hooked up all the filter, and like, we never built a koi pond before, you know what I mean? We did some research. YouTube's awesome for that, and we accomplished it, and it's just amazing. Among other things, planting trees, you know, building pergolas, and, you know, all kinds of different projects, painting, and it's endless, and that's all ladder work and stuff like that. So to me, that's a challenge in itself, and it's an accomplishment, you know.
Yeah. I guess one of the big questions in regards to your saving story is, did you get to compete in the Paralympics?
Yes, I did get to compete, and there was a couple of fellows out there. There was a fellow from Germany that ended up taking the gold medal, but I did get a bronze medal. So yes, I did get to compete, and I had a lot of folks helping me get there, because I couldn't afford to do any of it, really, but I couldn't afford not to. So, like I said, my father helped me out financially. That I had my house torn apart when I went to New York. I left to go to New York, which I ended up staying there 1 week, and then several trips back. But I literally, my house was really, it was a fixer-upper I bought. So it needed a lot of work, to the point where I had the whole floor out of the house. There was no floor in my house. I cut the whole floor out and had the whole thing like jacked up, and I left for New York. And so I had a lot going on in a way, but I had no girlfriend. I had no family, you know. I mean, I had no kids or anything at that time, so I could do it. So, you know, I'm glad I did do it.
And if you don't mind sharing, what's the name of this friend in New York that really, you know, really helped you out, especially as a young man? Having that kind of support system seems to have made an impact.
Oh, he was a special guy. His name was Michael Joyce, and the name of his company was Advanced Prosthetics, and it sure was advanced. He taught me how to stretch sockets and do things that we just weren't doing down here. So it was really a learning. That whole muscle promotion socket and thing was all new to me, but it all made a lot of good sense too, and it worked well, you know. And still to this day, I have very minimal phantom pain if I'm fitting well. If I'm starting to lose my fit or something, it triggers phantom pain because the limb's not situated correctly, and it gets irritated. So recently I'd lost a few pounds. I started losing my fit, and boom, I got this phantom pain that, I haven't had in a long time. But I know why, though, So, But yeah, Michael Joyce had a special way of motivating you to do things without being pushy, or he just had this gift that I always try to mimic with my patients to get them. I don't have it as good as he had it, but man, this guy, he just had a way of not wanting to let them down kind of thing. Like every time you went back up there, like you wanted to watch your weight and stuff because you knew he was paying attention. You know what I mean? When I first went to him and he casted me, I'll never forget it. He literally laid across my limb and stretched it to get that 10-degree flexion contracture out I was telling you. He stretched me for about a half hour before he even wrapped bandage on me.
Oh, wow.
I knew right away I was in a good place. Not to mention all the pictures on the wall of these people doing things, because everyone would send an 8x10 in with a note thanking them and showing them what they're doing. Whatever it was. Could have been riding a motorcycle or parachuting or whatever. And so seeing that in the shop was inspiring too. But when he stretched me for that long before he casted me, I thought, man. And I started learning from that point on. And it wasn't an easy transition. It was definitely tough to, you get used to something and then you got to change. And, these sockets were really high and controlling of you, but the higher the better, the more control you had. So it was a thing you had to invest in. You had to be willing to invest in it. And that's what I try to get patients to do when I encounter them, is I try to get them to, you do your half, I'll do my half, and we'll be good. You gotta do your part. And I can't emphasize that enough. People see amputees doing things and stuff, and that means they worked at it. It just didn't put a leg on and go. They invested their time and they wanted it bad enough. So just like anything else, if you invest into it, you're going to get something back. You're going to get a return back, just like anything else. So
so it seems from like what I've heard is that it's very important to have someone who truly believes in you and really is willing to put in the hours to try and make you the best that you can be. Your friend in New York, remind me his name again?
Michael Joyce.
Michael Joyce. He's not an amputee. He doesn't have an amputation.
No, he doesn't have an amputation. He was in the service and got hurt really bad. I'm not sure exactly how his accident happened, but if you look at his right leg, his back calf had a lot of damage to it. And he got involved in the Army orthopedic shop at that point when they were bracing him, and I think that's what triggered him to get involved in prosthetics. So he was probably one of the best guys in the country in the late 80s and early 90s. He was probably one of the best around. So yeah,
but having someone like that was very important, especially as a young
life-changing
person who had your amputation, even if it was probably 8 to 10 years after your amputation, but having someone in your life as a young person that was very helpful. Was there anyone else that really helped you and empower you since you've had your amputation?
I want to tell you, my original empowerment came from my family and friends long before any leg was even put on me. My friends once put me in a canoe in my early days when I still had sutures and stuck me in the Brandywine and took me down the river, and that really broke the ice. I'll never forget going down the embankment. How am I going to get down here? But I want to tell you, not one of them folks pitied me, and that's what made the difference from the beginning. And that's where it started, and that's where you keep it going. You don't people pull doors for you and stuff like that, and that's just out of courtesy. But as far as pitying you and think, no, I went down on my butt and slid down the bank there and got in the canoe, and it's wobbling around, and I'm scared to death thinking I'm going to get in this water and get some kind of infection, Them boys just cranked up that Beatles, and we went down to Brandywine, and man, I'll tell you, it was life-changing. That was early on, right out of the hospital. So those people really, really helped me and set the tempo. And then you come along and meet a fellow like Mike Joyce, and that just put the icing on the cake, you know. And then we had all the tools and you know.
So family is very important.
Vital, yes.
I guess
It affects
they're
the whole.
people who see you.
Yeah, the amputation itself affects the entire family, and I look at it like that when the people come in. I don't just look at the patient. I'm looking at the whole family. The whole thing affects everyone. So you got to be knowledge of that, and you got to know it all matters.
Mama, she's got one foot and daddy ain't got none. Two folks got but 5 toes, they can't walk near mine run. Rock and roll and hopping round the place, get to drinking in the wheelchair race. 5 toes clean up, no more, no less. 5 little bees, they're missing all the rest.